Welcome, audience, to the One Cell, One Light radio with your host, Dr. Hildegarde Staninger, commonly known as Dr. Hildy. This is our first show for the year 2012, and in this year, which on February 4th of this year will be under Chinese astrological signs, will be the year of the water dragon. And during this time, many truths are to be unveiled and shown to be, as colleagues of mine used to say, proof in the pudding. Today's show is not a unique show, but a very truthful. It is stating facts on two parts. The first part is going to be on what are Mesogens and their technology of building nano brain chips. At the same time, on the second hour, I'm going to have guests of Dr. Rima Lebo from the Natural Solutions Foundation, and also Mr. Michael DiMatteo of California Investigators, who Michael and I were involved in a case of an individual that ended up being a brain chip, and we're going to share that information with the world. And at the same time, there is a special conference that's occurring on this January 8th, which is in reference to the War Council that is going to be hosted by Dr. Rima Lebo, and I've been asked to be a special guest speaker on that to present the global brain chip and Mesogens, nanomachines for ultimate control of false memories. This subject is one not hard to present, but very scientific, very engineering, very political, very everything, audience. It is very hard. Everyone thinks, like you could have an RDIF chip, or you could have a tag of DNA or a clone specimen. By clone specimen, I mean of certain tissues within the body. But with the advent of nanotechnology, as I've had my guest on in previous shows in 2011, all of us recognize, not only as engineers, scientists, attorneys, professors, or anything, if the intent is for ill will, it can be done for ill will. If it is for good, it will be done for good. This particular materials can be used just as well to make new bone, new tissue, and give a person a new kneecap and the benefit of walking, or a new spinal cord. But at the same time, it can be used for very mean intents, which is primarily what I'm going to discuss, is its role in brain chips and also the use of the technology. In the beginning of books that were written within these last 5 years or so, there's been quite a lot of information given in reference to, as I had on my my guest speaker, Tom Horn, in reference to transhumanism. And basically, transhumanism is when you are no longer totally human, like 100% human. You also have some kind of material in you, or other foreign DNA, or other, I'm going to say foreign cells, because so many things can be cloned and chipped now. That it doesn't make you 100% human. You might be 99 or 98 or maybe even 95, but as you lose that quality, you take on other traits. That's what the literature is starting to point out and show. I want to give you a quote, though, that I quoted in a paper that I wrote for this weekend, which is by William E. Halal. This is from Emerging Technologies and the Global Crisis of Maturity, and he stated, although technological powers will be vast and progress will likely be made, the normal level of social resistance and political statement is likely to oppose change. Thus, it may take an occasional environmental collapse, global wars, and terrorists, or get unknown calamities to force the move to global consciousness. And in this, when you can introduce what I'm going to discuss specifically, what is a mesogen and how is it made, etc., keep that quote in mind. It can be of a total unknown origin, meaning scientists or the ones who made it will know what it is. But when you see in a paper that we're going to attach to our site after the show and after it's presented this weekend, you'll see that it is not just one aspect. It's not a metal. It's not just a crystal. It's not just a mineral. It's not just chemicals that are composed. It's all of it in one small, minute element, which we call nanotechnology. And in that element of nanotechnology, audience, there are so many building blocks. I can go into nanowires, nanotubes, nanomicroarrays, nano belts, nanofibers, nano-nylon, nano microspheres, etc. And the new term is being microspheres, micro-powders, micro-this, because nano right now has like a little tinge on it. But there is also an inventor and an author, which many of us have quoted over the time, and I've read his books, and that, which is Ray Kurzweil. He is an inventor for NASA, an author, and he wrote a book called Singularity is Near. Singularity is to be when we, as a human race, and all of the world, is connected to an implantable information chip that could be developed or wired directly into the brain. There's many projects out there that are funded by many individual parties or governmental or any entity in the name of science and engineering to have research in this area. But I'm going to share with you, audience, especially on the second half of the show, the results of a removal of a brain tumor, which was known as a meningioma because it was not cancerous. But when our company, Integrative Health Systems, was retained to do advanced nanomaterials analysis on it, we found a whole different story. And that story was showing how this material in reality was a mesogen. And a mesogen may be coated with many different thin films or other types of technology in the nanotechnology realm and also the biosensory realm. And why I call biosensors, because this technology is not just developed to control if we look at it as just being some bad people out there trying to control the whole world or anything like that, it is also used for individuals that may have a broken spinal cord or a column and used to connect those neurons so that it can also send the transmission. In the aspect of sending signals. But we have to also remember that many of the new inventions that have been done in nanotechnologies, which is not stated in my paper, example like the nano radio that was invented. It was created by a certain company and used for its use in nanomedicine so that it can send a signal. You can hear different conversations, etc. This type of technology can easily be placed in certain aspects of the ear canal or behind the ear, which is an old technology, voice-to-skull technology, where you had an electrode or a sensor there. But now with nanotechnology, it's made and designed by the skilled scientists and creators of this world to integrate into biological forms of our body. And in doing this, it is designed so that the body will hopefully not reject it so it can integrate into it. But in cases where you've got, I'm going to say, pure cells and pure identity of what it is, it does see this technology as a foreign invader, the foreign invader being the chemicals it's made of. I'm going to go specifically into different types of mesogens and how it can be used in the interface of a brain chip and other things, so it addresses our guest on the second half of the show. But I want you to keep in mind as we go through this discussion, and I'm basically talking to you by myself, audience. I have some technical support that will help me if I stumble or get a brain freeze in my discussion. The thing
yes,
is,
you do.
Which is Michael Edward. The thing is that you have to remember that we were created in a divine being, and no matter what your beliefs are, we basically are the same. We may have good heart, bad heart, whatever it may be, but we are human. And when you play around with this type of stuff in artificial biology, you end up creating many different other entities or abilities for different energies to come in. And that's not going to be the topic of this show, the different energy fields. The specific thing that I want you to get out of this first hour is, what is a mesogen and how is it used in not only medicine or in this type of technology for brain-computer interface? And when I say brain-computer interface, audience, I also mean that its ability to be connected to various other wireless technologies, say your cell phone, your computer, your TV, because remember our TVs were switched to high-definition TV all over the United States. So with different technologies, you may have a crystal that will resonate, and the liquid crystal that will resonate at a certain frequency so that it can interact with different equipment. Now, what is most important about any of this technology of the mesogens is that I came from OSHA and a lot of industry and academia that we were trained, and I wrote a beautiful book, The Comprehensive Handbook of Hazardous Materials, years ago. It became the international bestseller still to this day, and referenced in 94 reference libraries throughout the world, and also part of the amended OSHA standard for hazard communication as a reference document there for what is a hazardous material. A hazardous material is anything that can cause neurological, immune, liver, teratogen, cancer, any other special categories, ill health to an occupational worker. The thing is, though, in the field, many industrial hygienists or environmentalists or other related disciplines as safety engineers and occupational nurses and physicians do recognize that different chemical families can cause different types of toxicity within the body and thus prime you for disease or interaction. Also, it is also important that certain chemical compositions or specific chemical blends are known to go to certain organ systems. Why I say that is because when you start to really get into what is a liquid crystal and its types, what is a mesogen, and knowing these advanced nano building blocks that are used to make a machine or device that is used to integrate into another system or a smart system, you will find that whether it was the luck of the professor who invented it or the commercialization of the product into the nano world, I find it very interesting that certain chemicals that were used to make certain certain technologies of the mesogens or the types of them use specific chemicals that are very toxic to the body, react in specific ways, but have an affinity for certain areas of the body. I'll give you a prime example. We have gasoline. Gasoline is made up of 3 compounds, benzene, toluene, and xylene. In particular, benzene, which we know causes leukemia, but usually within 24 hours of exposure or when you're exposed to it, it converts in the body through the liver into phenol. So is phenol causing the leukemia, or is benzene the parent chemical, phenol being the metabolite? So I want you to keep those items in mind, audience, as we go over what is a mesogen. It is important to note that mesogens are made from a term or a group of compounds that are known as liquid crystals. Liquid crystals are, as we know, we have a prime example. When you look at water, you have it in three different forms. You have it in a liquid form, as we know we get our water from our tap water. We have it in as a gas when it's created into steam, as we boil our water to make tea. And then we also have it as ice, which is its crystalline lattice format. And that's what we're going to discuss, the use of liquid crystals that have specific properties that are then used and incorporated with other compounds to create the term mesogen. And there's different types of mesogens that we're going to learn about. Now, this is a complex topic just to discuss. So when we do show the Vimeo of this show, you will see a number of pictures. And I know as you listen and you also look at the pictures, you'll be able to see a lot of things that I'm talking about. The importance of the pictures, in particular with anything, and I used to teach, as I call it, school many, many years ago, the importance is that with a picture, it says 1,000 words. You can easily see what I'm talking about. So please, audience, bear with me, and you will understand, especially when you get to review it again with the Vimeo and see the photomicrographs that we have and many of the examples of how it is formed and made, these technologies. Now, in particular, with the mesogens, it is important to note that many of you may forget what you had in chemistry. You have to remember that each aspect of the periodic chart has different chemicals, different families of, different elements that then go and combine to make different compounds and different substances. In this, though, each one of the different families of the periodic table based on their elements have a special category. Example, the halogens, which are iodine, boron, fluoride, and iodine, where you also have transitional metals being barium, aluminum, zinc, etc., that have another trait. But what is different with the mesogen? And in particular, mesogens were used in nano delivery systems for medicines or technology so that they react under certain conditions. By reaction is if you took your hand and you made a fist, that right now I'm going to call the liquid crystal. It is compressed. A liquid crystal has a unique feature. It can melt at one point and not totally dissolve and change its characteristic into smaller crystalline lattices, or I should say crystal lattice, crystalline forms. The thing is that in many of this technology, it's coated with another chemical. So if you have the fist that is made that we call the liquid crystal, as it is formed, it can be coated in different compounds. These compounds will react under certain conditions. These certain conditions, and this, what I'm saying to you, audience, too, can be that this crystal contains in it the components, which can be little spheres or little dots that are seen on many pictures that can form into silicone arrays, which then make nanotubes, nanobelts, nano wires, etc. Okay, it is a complex field. I do recommend highly Nanotechnology for Dummies and other related books, and also books that are in a beautiful catalog by CRC Press, which will be having many of their authors on the show in the future. But you can see that it is multiple aspects done with this, but in particular, always remember a mesogen is a collection of liquid crystals with the special feature, and that's where it's based on its design and ability to twist or make different shapes. The thing is that it is dependent upon amount of oxygen, the halogens that are present, meaning like chlorine, fluorine, bromine, etc. It is also dependent on temperature and frequency. There may be some other variables as new devices are being made, but these are the primary devices. If you have your fist and you made your liquid crystal here and it's coated, if you were to take it, as we took one of our specimens and we melted it, normally a melting would occur at a certain temperature. Example, like enamel from your teeth will melt by melt meaning totally dissolve and usually burn up and disappear, it will melt at 1,268 degrees centigrade. But some of these other compounds melt at different temperatures or react. In the paper I'm presenting next weekend, we found that a material that it didn't even melt. It changed complete form, got black, and made a green powder after getting to a temperature starting with 0 and ending up with 1,100 degrees Celsius. That means multiply it by 2, add 35 for a quick analogy of what the Fahrenheit temperature is. The thing is that each one of the layers that this crystal could be coated in with multiple crystals to be in a glue, the glue being a nanocomposite or a matrix like I've discussed in previous papers on smart crystals or smart crystal notes, where they have a certain chemical that will react to your pH so it can absorb deliver the payload, which will be the crystals that can then react with either other compounds or other materials within your body or itself, but primarily it needs certain reactions with water as either steam, evaporation, and steam can be perspiration, sweating, evaporation, and also amount of water with its minerals. Minerals in particular, tissue salts, I feel are very detrimental to these man-made materials because in many cases when I've outlined or suggested to individuals to use when they have a specimen in their nasal cavity or their nasal bulb, I ask them to use just plain salt water that you get from taking table salt, mixing it like a half a teaspoon or a teaspoon in 8 ounces of warm water, not too hot so you don't burn your nose, but they just swab that area of their nasal passage with a Q-tip, and they end up having a complete specimen come out. And we're going to discuss several specimens that I found in 3 locations, and I presented in my NREP paper, which was in October, and I did a show on it. But remember this. The liquid crystal can change at different temperatures into a more liquid aspect or a more bendable, more flexible. And in this, you can use it in many forms, as I discussed. You can use it for medicine. You can use it to deliver something else. You can attach another compound to it. Ideal tool for industrial espionage. Also can be used in Wi-Fi smart communications, especially communications that are integrated into the medical aspects with different hospitals, physicians, etc., because now they may be monitoring you if you're an older person that may forget to take your medicine to see if you're taking the medicine. Not many people want to swallow a pill that's an RDIF chip, so new technologies are being made as we're discussing here. Now, in each case of this, as I stated earlier, it depends on what the payload is. The payload is what are you going to deliver within the body. These mesogens, which are a collection of these crystals that then form into other nanotechnologies or a composite of it. You could even have nanopowders in it to give it a certain, I'm going to say a transitional state so that it will make a certain shape. Example, if you take your hand, which I stated earlier in the show, as a liquid crystal, but now we open it up and we spread out our fingers, that is exactly a basic shape of what a mesogen is. Your thumb or your fingers tips can be the actual claws or nano hooks that could be composed of a different compound. At the same time, if I spread my fingers wide, just open hand, I could also close it and, just wave with it. It would have a different tension and a different percentage of expansion. The thing is, if you also look at your hand, we're so used to looking at one-dimensional or two-dimensional things, meaning written word on paper or reading a book, etc. A book, though, is three-dimensional, so you have to have length, width, and height to be a 3D because you have to have three different areas of vector, which is in space. The thing is, with the advent of mesogens, which are basically done like if we were building a building, but look at your hand as I'm explaining this. We have our hand in front of us. We have the bottom palm area, which is covered with our skin, and the upper area. Inside we know we have bones, muscles, etc. But if you had to describe how many layers were within it that made up the hand, that may be difficult for you, or even myself. But the thing is, if you take this in mind, to make each layer, the bottom layer of skin, the upper area of the muscles, etc., is a different mesogen, a different liquid crystal composition, so that it can make the bones go out to the fingers, as it can make nano wires or nano hooks hook onto a certain area of the body. In particular, new technology using mesogens has specifically looked not only at the ratio of acetylcholinesterase chloride, in particular acetylcholinesterase, the enzyme, because we use that as the gasoline within our nerves in our body. It is looked upon at the same ratio or the same amount of acetylcholinesterase can form in the neurojunctions. The neurojunctions are points of the nerves where these mesogens can claw on, hook on, just like if you were going to put a snap on a nerve. Just hook on and then be able to receive the input from a computer or an electrical source by Wi-Fi, or say you had to do neurotransmission and send electrical stimulation. Many individuals are familiar with the TENS machine that, sends electrical transmission into the nerves so that you can have clearing of the polarization of the nerve and also have response of the nerve. But it's the machine and the body versus in this technology or application, it would be mesogens, which are in various phases of liquid crystals, which makes the different shapes and stuff. It can be more elastic and hook on, and thus it can transmit the signal because it must have another component. And these are what we're going to talk about, these various components. As I stated earlier, it's very dependent upon temperature. And the temperature, we think, okay, our body is 98.6. What is the temperature that may change it? Well, in many of these cases, it may be that you are introduced to this technology, and to make it go into a different phase, which they call metotrophic, meaning the use of metals, lyotrophic, Lyotrophic, or thermotrophic, it would have different formations during the different phases of its temperature. And these formations, which is commonly known in chemistry as the transitional phases, okay? And the majority of the solvents that are used are water. It is also important to note that nano materials, in particular like smart dust, etc., and crystals may be dissolved in alcohol, acetone, and dimethylformamide, which is a form of formaldehyde family, or other types of solvents that it's designed to carry. The thing is, though, in many of the liquid crystals, we've seen them in everyday life as LCDs, liquid light crystals, any of this. It is dependent upon the phases of where it is first observed. There was a physiologist, Austrian botanical physiologist, Friedrich Reinitzer, and in 1888 he was at the Charles University in Prague, which I personally have visited and spoke to their provost many years ago when I had projects over there. The thing is, though, he was the first to isolate the cholesterol liquid, and in this he did melting points, freezing points, etc., and he found that at various temperatures it would change its characteristics and form more crystal lattice material. And that's my simple version. And this various liquid phases was called a mesophase, meaning the transitional phase of these molecules of cholesterol. Now, in this stage, as it got colder, they found more crystalline matter versus as it got higher, it melted it. The unique thing with cholesterol, or in this cholesterol benzoate, which is the active compound in cholesterol, as with any of these liquid crystal compounds that would be used in formulation, it was found that if you melted it, it would go into the liquid phase. If you would cool it down, it would go into the crystalline phase, and vice versa. This is the unique thing with mesogens. It will, and liquid crystals that are used in mesogens, it will make that transition of going from the liquid to the crystalline and back to the liquid as it is changed in temperature or frequency. And in many cases, some of these activations are done with microwave, terahertz, some of the newer versions of mesogens, gamma radiation, EMF, electromagnetic frequency, ultra-low frequency, high frequency, etc., may trigger certain chemical aspects of these liquid crystals into forming a certain shape, area, and connection to our body. And in particular, there's a category of liquid crystals called elastomers. They're made out of the same chemicals that we use to make elastic, like polyurethane, polyesters, nylons, Teflons, any of these other materials that are used into making polymers, methyl methacrylate, etc. The different types of what they call side arms or chains. Example, I'm Dr. Hilde. I've got 2 arms and 2 legs. But if my right arm was made up of alkanes or acryls, or my left arm siloxanes, that's what it means by side chains. These materials can be interchanged or designed so that it has a specific feature that can be done in its chemical composition. Now, with each one of the liquid crystals, as it's being used in the building blocks of the mesogen, it is important to note that what do you have to create with any of this is you have to create a way so that it can connect to the body. So certain chemicals, certain piezoelectrical devices do connect. Now, with any of this, we have found that there is a specific area that is the orientation, that not only does the chemical have a charge, meaning these liquid crystals are because of what it's combined with, but also many of the materials that are done on the nano side that could be loaded into the liquid crystal are of a nano piezoelectrical material. Thus, as we learned in other shows, like with Dr. Wang, that it can create more energy within that biosystem or within the field of its use.
Okay, Hildy, can I ask a question? You get into really great detail, so I want to back up. Notes was coming in the beginning because I wasn't clear about it. So I'm sure to help the audience that we can kind of summarize something here. The whole key is basically, to me, what is a mesogen or mesogen, however we're going to call it? And I'm seeing that this is a virus, the simple way to put it. And aren't all viruses nano? In other words, they're smaller than bacteria or cellular size?
Right. And I don't want to confuse the audience. We're going to call this a man-made compound that acts like a virus. And I agree with you. Meaning, when we get and use this material and we put it into a host, which is the body either will integrate it or fight it off or let it work symbiotic with it itself.
Okay. Could it be possible then, and I'm just trying to clarify so that I understand, and I'm sure this is going to help others, because you're so absolutely brilliant with all this. We have so much to catch up on while we're listening to you start describing all this. And I just want to try to simplify it for the rest of us who haven't even read the first paragraph of any book that you've probably read in science. So this mesogen or mesogen, this nano technology, lab created, which is really the size of a virus. I read in your report, it says it infects mature and adult hosts and not the embryonic ones. Could that be, for an example, and here's my big question, such as a bacteria which is not nano-sized? Let's say, common cold bacteria or whatever. These synthetic viruses, these nanoviruses, the mesogens, they could alter and change the mature and adult bacteria? Yes. Okay.
It can evolve. In other words, if we put the picture in our mind of the mechanism of a virus, how it can get into the host cell, but it is also used as a building block because it can attract, due to its charge, bacteria and other things, just as it can expand in a chemical mesogen, expand in its development into a specific shape, folding, hook, or other type of device. And where that definition of viral component, and I do not want to confuse the audience, it was the definition of mesogenic actions within the human body as it is defined under Merck manual, that it will act like a virus.
Well, you know why I was asking, because of the things with the Gulf of Mexico. I'm never going to give that up. So
and I think it's right on target.
Well, that and I do want you to explain a little bit better, because I'm not clear and I'm trying to understand. You're talking about these mesogenic liquid crystals. Now, apparently from what I've read on your report, they can be different types of liquid crystals, but that's not my point here. You said they're dormant until they're triggered by frequencies. Then you say microwaves and such. So these are like basically robots in a way. These are synthetic, lab-created nano robots that are dormant, that we wouldn't even know that we have them within our body or within any of our cells, and we wouldn't know that until they're triggered by the way that they were created to be triggered with a certain frequency. Am I getting that right?
Right.
That's scary, Hildy.
Right.
That's really scary stuff.
This whole topic can be, and also as we each grow in our knowledge and the acceptance of these facts that are truths within our reality of human life right now in the year 2012, we should have the knowledge and not go in fear, because with knowledge you always have wisdom. As I stated earlier on the show, it might be as simple as using some salt water to reduce body exposure. But the thing is that in the bad hands, or in the hands of someone who wants to control, it can be used as a controlling device.
It's a weapon.
And we're going to learn. Go ahead.
It's a weapon, controlling device. It could be more than, oh my gosh, so much more than using World War I chemical warfare in the trenches of Europe. This is something that you could aerosol spray it. Nobody would know they ever breathed it, and it's in with them. It could be aerosolized. That's not the right word. It could be an aerosol spray, and nobody would know about it.
It could be an aerosol. It could be, as simple as what we're experiencing with geoengineering, and smart crystal motes or anything. The thing is, the design of the coatings that are used on it, or the encapsulation process, can also keep within it a more hazardous material. Example, you mentioned World War II in reference to, I'll give you an example, like when they used phosgene and mustard gas. You could take materials of that, put it in an encapsulation, dump it, and you'd never know it until you activate it from a remote source. I mean, It can be as simple as that. At the same time, in this paper, it took many different types of laboratory tests. There's no just instrument that can just do one compound of this. It had to take many different disciplines of chemistry to whether it's scanning electron microscope, Raman, any of this, and why I particularly use Raman technology is so that we don't destroy the specimens. But it's layered. It's different chemicals as we go through the process of identifying what is going on, with this material. So yes, and I know, you're well read, Michael, just as I am. It can create anything. The unique thing about it is that, and I always talk about industrial espionage, you could have somebody come in to your office and say, hey, I'm just, here to check the phone, but not if you didn't check their license, not their license, their badge and stuff like that, that could easily just sprinkle something and change your whole life. It is that easy, and it is very hard, as we're going to learn on the second hour of this show, how you can get the seriousness of this, not go into fear, because many individuals that are in the field, even my own field, they're clueless on this.
That's not encouraging. that some of your colleagues might be clueless, but...
Well, they'll say, they can open a book, etc., but they haven't had the field experience to identify it in the field.
Wow.
Which is a whole other thing as our audience will look at the images that will be on the Vimeo. You think you might have a brain tumor, but until you cut it through, and it's amazing that you couldn't use a scalpel, you had to use a diamond cutter to cut through a specimen.
Well, in people, and you said that had a lot to do with these mesogens. They apparently only work with or actually infect mature adult hosts, such as a cell, for an example, a bacteria cell within us or whatever. Is that true?
And I think that was what it was designed for.
Okay, that was my question, because I wasn't clear enough.
In reality, it could infect anybody, and I'm using the term infect, audience, just as to use as an example of how a foreign body can get into your human body. It's just like a better example is if I took gasoline and poured it on somebody, it absorbs into the skin. I light a match, it goes faster. It burns you up. Okay? Each one has different properties. Those are the physical characteristics. It's a flammable.
Okay, so that emphasizes that they're dormant until they're triggered, and you said that they were designed to be triggered by certain frequencies. And, of course, we have all sorts of different frequencies within microwave range. It could be ultra-low frequency. It could be ELFs, UHFs. Wow. and how would you find this out?
Well, that's it, in combined frequencies. I have been fortunate, or our company, Integrative Health Systems, is that, I have clients or patients that become the client of this that have specimens or have stuff coming out of their body, and they're physicians, or they want to know what it is, and they fund those projects. And it can be very expensive by everyday standards, but it's where far less than hiring a university or anything, because a university now will start at $250,000 or more in just doing analysis for one specimen in relation to whatever it may be as an unknown.
Ouch.
It's hard.
Wow. I thought that I had learned enough from you previously to understand some of the nanotechnology, but this show today, and I was able to kind of cheat a little bit. I got to see your paper that you're presenting, your rough draft, as you said. To me, it's not so rough.
Well, by rough draft, it hasn't gone through grammar.
Well, I didn't see a whole lot of grammar mistakes, so I think you did great. It was worth being up late night or two.
Yeah, that's true.
This is mind-boggling, Dr. Hilde, to realize that something that could do so much good, a technology, this nanotechnology that could definitely, without a doubt, by theory anyway, perhaps it's gone beyond that, can cure a cancer. Any cell that is mutant and not acting correctly, that these Mesogens, these viruses could go in there and stop the mutation, so to speak, triggered by a certain frequency. What a fantastic thing. But at the same time, it's really scary to realize how that can be used as a weapon to do destructive things.
Right, and just as you said, can identify a cancer, specific type where the location is or within the organ, and it can also, if we were in the bad mind or weaponizing it, it could deliver specific cancers. It could trigger specific ancestry gene pools, et cetera, this way, that are predestined, or I'm going to say predisposed. Example, like people that are of Baltic heritage, Estonia, Latvia, Polish, Poland, and also Lithuanian, because of the way they lived, meaning I'm talking 100 years ago or so, they had a lot of grain, they put it into silos, or it got spoiled by different molds, in particular penicillins, and that they're more allergic to penicillins and also are more prone to adenoviral type diseases of the kidney. Thus, if you took a plasmid, which is a portion of some of these viral components, and designed, we're going to say, a weapon, it could easily be designed with these types of technology to create a disease pattern or loss of function in certain select, I'm going to say, genetic groupings or ancestries of nationalities. It is the time that we're living in now. I call it unique in the simple reason that I guess we're more aware because we've gone through the veils of seeing what the real truth is. When you can have funds or you can do whatever you want, you can, there's some people out there that doesn't even have to be in a political situation or country. They just want to do it for the joy of it because they just want to see how the human reacts, not thinking that they're part of that humanity.
Wow. Again, it's a Pandora's box. There's the best way to describe it, because it can have unintended results from what you're saying.
Right, and the consequence, because this is all new. There's never been a field study on how many people have been exposed, et cetera, prime example is what I did with all that Morgellons research, the activities assisting the physicians with their patients, to assess what the chemicals are coming out of their bodies, and it all pointed to every one of them nanotechnology with undertones of some type of delivery system, because it is not normal for you to have on your face nylon 66 growing out of it.
No, I'd say that's not normal.
No, it is not normal to have your eyes, corneas burned by vinyl chloride when you never even worked in an industrial plant. But it's leaking out because the little spheres or the liquid crystals that contain these compounds are now leaching out, breaking down. And that's another feature, too. Many bodies, I should say individuals, as I got involved in that project and still to this day, as I said, hey, it was the experiment went wrong. Your body was rejecting it, trying to get it out, etc. So it couldn't integrate into your body. As we found that ones had good GI tract, if it was done in spheres or done in, I'm going to say modified food starches, or anything that you would ingest these types of materials, or any of the crystals that were used, like we experienced with high fructose sugar, liquid crystals. Those are liquid crystals. What's in them? All of a sudden they're on the market. We know that, hey, polyurethane, styrene is not good for you. Why are you putting it in the starch?
Good
that
point.
Type thing. And as I brought out in the paper, I specifically, there was a range on the ramen which was 730. I had nasal bulb mesogens and also the brain, I'm calling it the brain chip, meaning the mesogen that was isolated from a brain meningioma that was extracted from a mutual client patient by UCLA. Turn around, it had 730 styrene. This particular individual also tested positive for the metabolites of styrene, which were mandelic acid and the hipporic acid, through urine. So when we go into that history on the second hour, what I'm saying to the audience, and is to you, Michael, there are not just one compound. It could be nickel. You have metals coming out of you. You could have viral components loaded into this. Example, like when they were testing for the nanosensory devices that were done in Utah, there was an epidemic of black ferret, meaning the animals, the ferrets, getting bubonic plague because they were doing the sensor with nanotechnology in testing for bubonic plague.
So just the testing using the nanotechnology was bringing about bubonic plague in the ferrets?
Yeah, in the ferrets.
Wow.
There was an epidemic of it when we never have had bubonic plague in the United States.
Oh, that's weird. So that is why you've mentioned me before about how any kind of nanotechnology, even if it's something that we think is good, such as taking, I'm not sure this is the right example, taking even a good antifungal and antibacterial agent such as silver and putting it into certain nano types of forms could possibly affect other parts of us as being the host in ways that we don't know.
Yeah, because you have to look with nano, you have to look at the chemical. Example, like you mentioned, silver. It has a charge, it's covalent, positive, negative charges, etc. What area does it have an affinity for? Is it harder to get out of the body, etc.? Because we know it's a heavy metal, just as lead, arsenic, and cadmium, they're heavy metals. They tend to accumulate in the body and have different affinities. Why does lead stay in the nerves and go into the lower parts of the body where arsenic loves to go into the skin? It has certain chemical characteristics that allows it to do different functions within the bioterrain of that biological specimen. or entity like ourselves, humans. But at the same time, many of these nanomaterials, they are using chemicals which I have learned all my adult life have no life force, and that is why certain pharmaceuticals never worked properly. Maybe the original penicillin worked before 1947, but then when they commercialized it and made it into organic chemical synthesis versus the active ingredient of penicillin, meaning from the actual mold, you didn't have the same, you had people not responding to it as well for infections, and it saved us in World War II. None of us are questioning that. But the thing is, when you take whole foods or plants that have a life force within them and put it into your body, you end up absorbing that radiant heat. Thus, certain amounts of that radiant heat stimulate your own body to form and to regenerate. Versus in many of these other materials, it's just coating. It's reacting with the polar charges of the cells. Or, prime example, these materials may be acid or base in nature. If it's acidic, what is the body going to first do? If you get hit by these little nanoparticles or it gets on your skin, what is it going to do? It's going to try to make your skin more alkaline. Thus, it's going to send in calcium, try to encapsulate these materials, and in encapsulating these materials, it could cause inflammation, and thus you have symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis or a muscle, not paralysis, but where a muscle gets locked up because of that calcification within the muscle. I'm talking within the muscle fibers, the balance of calcium, magnesium, potassium.
Great, Hildy. Let me get us started here on your break, and can't wait for the second hour. Thanks for letting me participate.
Okay, and thank you for helping me.
Informed, enlightened, alive and amplified. This is the Living Light Network.
Welcome back, audience, to the second hour of One Cell, One Light Radio with your host, Dr. Hildegarde Staninger, commonly known as Dr. Hildy. Our first hour was on mesogens and the technology of building brain chips and brain biosensors. This particular hour is going to address a patient client of mine that then was introduced to a investigative services, private investigator, to do special investigations, and which is Mr. Michael DiMatteo of DiMatteo and Associates here in California. And also we're having a little difficulty getting the person on due to traveling or the connections in Panama, is Dr. Rima Lebeau. I have known Dr. Lebeau. She is the medical director of Natural Solutions Foundations, but also a physician and trained psychiatrist, and in particular with the brain. And that's why I've asked her to be here with us, if she can join us on technical support in our questions in our presentation. Michael, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, great. Audience, I'm going to give you a little history, and then Michael's going to join in. In July 2011, Integrative Health Systems myself had a patient client that was approximately female, approximately 57 years of age, Chinese ancestry, and a musician. And did a lot of cultural studies, educational, many awards, etc. But in particular, I'm emphasizing that is because she did use her brain. She was a professional and was in the system. During this time, 2 years prior to 2011, she was sitting at her desk and was talking on the phone with the phone receiver in her right ear. She experienced an extreme pain in the left ear. Did not hear anything, but the pain was like of burning needles that went into the ear canal, and then in days or shortly after that time traveled to the left lobe of her brain. when she came to our cells, she was referred and scouted for many different physicians, and they worked with her. It was identified in 2010 that she had a meningioma, a brain meningioma in the left sphere of the brain that was approximately 9 millimeters in size. She had scheduled surgery, and surgery was done at Cedars-Sinai Hospital here in the Beverly Hills area of California, and the surgeon who removed it was the director of UCLA's neurosurgery division. And in reality, when the material was removed, the meningioma was not 9 millimeters in size. It was 1.2 centimeters. Patient-client doing well ever since that event in time. And this is where I'm introducing my special guest, Michael DiMatteo of DiMatteo and Associates, private investigators for California. And Michael, can you give your side of the history as we go into the details of this case?
Certainly. I was contacted by this subject by telephone, and she requested that I help her in attempting to contact law enforcement about this issue because she felt that she had been the victim of a crime. And I've spent the past several months trying to help facilitate meetings between her and various law enforcement agencies.
Yes, and during this time, as with any type of crime, I know, Michael, you have to have some type of evidence. An audience, the evidence that I'm presenting is showing what this material is made out of, which does not at any way say who shot it through the glass or who may have done that type of aspect. We're just looking at characteristics and events, and also trying to assist individuals that have had this type of unique scenario occur in their lives. And I know, Michael, we have shared, I personally have had referrals from, example, like Freedom for Covert Harassment, Directed Energy individuals, etc. But with the advancement of other sciences, in particular with nanotechnologies and the use of these mesogens, or liquid crystals, it's getting not harder to prove, but more science and more budgetary needs for any of these individuals to even prove some type of exposure versus just physiological changes within their body. Have you seen that? I know maybe some individuals have contacted you over the years, and many law enforcement look at it like it's all in their brain, like they're crazy.
Right. I'm a retired police officer. I was a cop for 27 years, and we all had stories about the people that we talked to that wore the tinfoil hats. And if the policeman was a nice guy or if they were professional, they would politely listen to people and basically just determine whether or not they posed a danger to themselves or others and possibly took them for a psychiatric evaluation. I've gotten a real education since becoming involved in this case and since my association with you, which, to be honest with you, has made me rethink a lot of the things that I did when I worked as a policeman, because I had absolutely no idea that any of this type of thing was going on. I would listen to, like late-night radio and hear things every once in a while about it, but I thought it was pretty much in the realm of science fiction or fantasy. But, since I've been involved in this investigation and I've actually seen all the work that you've done in the testing and that we've been able to actually show that there's something wrong here, it's really opened my eyes. And the biggest problem that I've had with this case is trying to get anybody in law enforcement to take me seriously.
Right, and also, I know you've shared this with me, and I appreciate your comments, Michael, because on both sides of the fence, you from the law enforcement side and working with that group of professionals, and myself on the science and the medical side, it's been a learning experience, even for the individuals that removed or were in the process of collecting the specimen, after surgery, and the patient-client audience retained our services, and also Michael's private investigation company, to make sure that a specimen was picked up right after surgery. It was under chain of custody and could be taken and sent, to the laboratory for advanced materials testing. And there's not many labs that do that. I've just been fortunate in having them under contract for 20-some years of my professional life. But the thing is, trying to even explain this, let alone the approach of your exposure, meaning the patient-client's exposure possibly through a device that was in the bushes or outside of her office, trying to explain how this could be like the ultimate poison to even a law enforcement investigator. It's hard. I know you went through trials and tribulations with it.
Right, and they actually, to be honest with you, they think you're crazy. I did a lot of... I'm sorry?
Hello?
Yes.
This is Dr. Rima, and I've been listening to the discussion, and first of all, I want to tell you what a pleasure and privilege it is to be with both of you talking about this terribly, terribly important topic. And second of all, I wanted to make a comment, because the notion of what makes somebody crazy is very much an issue that we psychiatrists think about, and I want to qualify that a little bit. I am an MD, I am a psychiatrist, as you said, Dr. Hildy, but I have never used drugs in either my psychiatric or my medical practice. So I'm a psychiatrist who actually thinks about things a little bit differently and helps people a little bit differently than folks who poison their brains with psychiatric and other drugs. I just wanted your audience to know that. The issue of what makes us sure that what we're hearing is crazy or is not crazy is a complex and important one. For instance, I'm the director of the Natural Solutions Foundation, www.healthfreedomusa.org, and we've been talking about genocide and the genocidal agenda, and precisely in the same way that you're saying, I had all this evidence, and I tried to get people in law enforcement and toxicology and other scientific and professional disciplines to listen to me, and they just thought I was crazy, so they dismissed me. That's the same thing that we have anytime new information that is a serious cognitive dissonance, that is to say, that makes us uncomfortable because it challenges our worldview, comes up. So it doesn't matter what the particular topic is. What we have to do is find ways to make what we're saying audible against the protective barrier that people and society will put up to make sure that its very, very dearly held but perhaps wrong ideas are not challenged. So we have to be superb communicators. As they say, extraordinary claims demands extraordinary experience. In fact, it's that extraordinary information demands extraordinary communication skills. Rational thought and data are not enough because we're dealing with people's fear of hearing new stuff that might unhinge their whole world.
I agree. Not only the fear of, I'm going to say, the one who's investigating and going into their world, but also the one who was exposed to this type of technology. The fear within their family, because their family members may not understand this technology, or it may be totally new to the individual, but the individual who was exposed is open to listening because they had the exposure. They had events that happened in their life.
Absolutely. And so what you get is additional stress, additional isolation, additional trauma from being isolated from the herd, from not having anybody believe you, from being rejected or responded to angrily. And so you get people who become more and more frantic because nobody will believe them. And, of course, as we become frantic, we become less good at communicating. So as we, the people with information that we need to get out there, become more and more strident, we become less and less audible. I just made a video called Making Genocide Audible, which you can do a search for, Making Genocide Audible, about this very problem, about the issue of how to get people to hear something that they don't want to hear and that they have every cultural reason to believe couldn't possibly be worth hearing, when in fact not hearing it could cost them their lives. And that's exactly true of what you're speaking about with what happened to this woman who developed a meningioma following exposure to something that, according to conventional wisdom, couldn't possibly have happened, but did.
Right, and I want to explain to the audience just a little bit in reference to the specimen. We're going to have pictures on it on the show, but this specimen, when it was when Michael picked it up and brought it to my office, we did an additional chain of custody. We packed it up and shipped it out that same day. But what I want to tell the audience is that when you heard it, you know, in the plastic bottle that it came from Cedars Hospital, Cedars-Sinai Hospital pathology department, it sounded just like a marble, like a rock inside. It was hard as anything. When it went to the lab, they had to use a diamond cutter, which is a saw, to cut through it because it would not cut through by a scalpel. Short version, analysis did show the composition of silica and other types of minerals, but in particular, when we did Raman analysis, we cut it open. When you cut something open, it will have a texture of whatever its composition, especially with flesh or anything. Just as you cut a piece of meat with a knife, it will go straight, and you'll see the ribs, the tissue formations. But when you have a device that is cut, and then you see another device within it, which is like the skeleton hands of the Mesogen formation, which is a group of all the nanomaterials that is used in its design. The thing is that each one of those layers or each one of those different items can also react with different frequencies, even in the formation of it, meaning we have particle go in through the ear canal, which showed a different calcification and composition, but it showed also the carbonate side of what they call brain sander, that I'm going to say hydroxypapatate, which is a mineral, which is enamel. But it's not normal to have it where it was located between, not even in the brain, on the surface of the brain, between the membrane and the skull. And also, which was further, when it was done the analysis inside using Raman so we wouldn't destroy the specimen, the inside specimen had animal protein. When we did the analysis looking at the different frequencies, it had 730, which matched our nasal mesogens that were identified from specimens taken from Los Angeles, New York, and Saudi Arabia that matched that, which was polyurethane, and their hooks had the polyurethane matched the brain chip, but it also had glue on the claws, which was super glue. And where I'm going with this is that the inside, it also had animal protein, the animal protein of cyanobacter, not the protein, not of the whole bacteria, but of the protein sheath, again designed. The outside was the enamel, the inside was the other specimen. Each one of the frequencies that were identified on the micro-Fourier trans-infrared matched a different chemical composition that goes back into the formation of liquid crystals, which are different stages, different types of components that can be used in, I'm going to say, the machine being the mesogen or the aspect. It's a whole new science out there, even into identifying it. Yeah. And I know, Michael, when you even tried to explain it to the local law enforcement for the client, the thing is, you had a beautiful analogy, if you would like to share it, with what is being done in Australia, with bandages.
Sure. And I did some research because I wanted to, in all honesty, just dumb it down to where anybody could understand what I was trying to get across. And I had found some research or some work that had been done in Australia concerning burns. And I had read that burns give off a specific type of bacteria, and that nanotechnology was used to develop a substance which was put on gauze. And as long as the wound was healing properly, it lay dormant. However, if the bacteria was detected, it would react to the nanomaterial, it would release antibiotics, and it would turn the gauze a color, so medical personnel would know that there was an infection forming. I tried to give this information to local law enforcement, and to be perfectly honest with you, I was laughed out of a couple different locations. I had people demanding to know who I was, asking for personal information. These are law enforcement people that I used to work with, asking for personal information, asking for my Social Security number, my home address, not my business address, how much money I had been paid by the client, and because they basically thought that this was a huge scam and that I was trying to take somebody's money away from them.
Yeah, and that is not truth at all, meaning, and this is the whole thing with, I'm going to say it, independent research projects like we've both been involved with on this particular case. It takes an individual that has resources financially to get the answers that they're looking for. As with anything, it's not, this type of testing is not covered through medical analysis because no one's paying for the research. That's what you get the grants on. But what is happening, like in our company, as with the integration of your company in this joint effort with us, with this mutual client and my patient, has been that we're trying to get the information to assist the client so that, in my case, so that she can get well and get on with her life. At the same time, if there is other types of devices within her, trying to get them isolated and identified and removed out of her if her body can withstand, additional operations or whatever would be needed in that aspect.
I don't think that people really understand how much technology has advanced in the last, say, 20 or 30 years. You can, just to think about it, the smartphone that everybody carries on their hip nowadays has more power than the computer that was used on the Apollo 11 lander that went to the moon. 20 years ago, if I were to tell, or somebody were to come to me and say that they were the victim of a crime because they talked to somebody on a computer from another country, and all of a sudden they got into their bank account and stole their money, I am sure that I would have not a clue how that could have happened. But now, with the advent of the Internet, it's a common everyday occurrence, and so law enforcement has adjusted to that kind of thing. But to walk up to somebody, policemen are very pragmatic, black and white, right and wrong kind of people. Their job makes them that way. And to go up to somebody and say, I have information indicating that somebody played a tone on a telephone which caused a piece of technology or a biological material too small to see to react inside of a person's head and cause them severe pain and discomfort. Anybody's natural assumption would be to say, well, how is that even possible?
Right.
And it's very hard. Even with this case, in this case in particular, you've been able to show that there is a problem, that there's foreign material in this person's body, But now, law enforcement, if somebody were interested in investigating it, would have to try and establish even if a crime was committed. And that takes somebody that believes enough into finding out the case to do a proactive investigation. And on at least one occasion with the Los Angeles Police Department, I was told that, okay, well, you found this stuff in this woman's body. How do you know somebody put it in there to hurt her? How do you know a crime was committed? How do you know it wasn't accidental? And they refused to look at the case. Well, that's what investigators do. And until you find somebody that's willing to take a proactive stance and try to investigate the incident, it's going to go nowhere.
Right. It's like dead in the water, not by the efforts or the energy of the client. It's just I don't even like to use the term current system. It's where the system doesn't realize what's out there even.
Exactly.
And I myself, I was like winged in my adult life on hazardous materials. But when you look at how many chemicals were just in these parts materials that we found or received from her through that mesogenoma, which was in reality a mesogen, there's at least 9 different compounds easily, in it between the nickel, the Yes.
Dr. Hilde, I wonder, I think there may be people listening to the show. I know that the people who are listening, because they came from the Health Freedom Action e-alerts at healthfreedomusa.org, may be unfamiliar with the term mesogen. I wonder if you would explain to folks what that means when you say that this meningioma was in fact a mesogen. It's enormously important.
Yes. A mesogen is a collection of liquid crystals that may be composed of different compounds, and they're designed so that they make a crystal lattice at different temperature, pH, oxygen exposure, or amount of water. And in this, it could be done in layers, meaning layers like a jawbreaker where you have different chemicals coating it. Example, like in the center you might have the protein sheath of cyanobacter that is then coated with polystyrene that is then has an arm chain of a chemical which may be a siloxane, etc. The thing is that it is a man-made material. It's designed to be small pellet or crystalline in nature, but then it is used by putting that material as like if it was like glitter into a glue, so that the glue would be the nanocomposite, so that it could be delivered or it could react with the skin, or in this case, it could be transferred to the ear and down the canal. Why I'm saying that, audience, is when you look at the results in the paper that I'm going to present on Sunday, you will see that it had to have some kind of acoustical laser, a plasma laser, or a microwave handheld machine. Why microwave? Because the amount of compound that was the enamel, when it's exposed to as in a pellet that is a liquid crystal, when it is exposed to microwave, it will make one unique feature in its end result. It will have protein in the center and the enamel on the outside. And what did I say earlier on the show? That the mesogen, which was the man-made device that looked like a meningioma but was not a meningioma, meaning meningioma by my standards was not, maybe debatable by the pathologist, but they have copies of this report too, that it doesn't form normally that way, because it's not normal to have these materials in the area or the tissue or down the ear canal. Because like in your practice, Dr. Rima, how many calcified ear canals have you experienced in your practice ever?
Never. I know.
Yeah,
of course. I think that
like
a lot
mine,
of
never
people,
until this one.
Exactly. Of course, it's not a normal thing. I think that a lot of people may be sitting here kind of with their jaws open saying, but it sounds as if something was introduced into her body which was ready to become a brain tumor, a lethal brain tumor. And then when it was examined, it was completely different from ordinary brain tumors. How could that be? Who wanted to hurt her? Was she just a random experiment? So I imagine people are trying to put this into the framework that they ordinarily would use for any kind of data. I wonder if you could help them out.
Yeah, Michael, could you help on this and explain the client, and I can explain, the exposure?
Well, when I first spoke with her, I gave the example of tinfoil hats that policemen run into, right? This lady was actually wearing a bonnet that had lead in it because she said that she was being attacked by gamma radiation. When I first talked to her, I seriously attempted to talk her out of using me or my services because I thought that I might just be wasting her money. And she basically demanded that I help her in trying to facilitate this and getting the things done. And it was because of it, I'll be honest, it was because of ignorance on my part. I knew nothing of this. But as I sat down and talked with her, I saw that, this woman was terrified. She was absolutely terrified. She was terrified to the point where she would talk to me. I'd begin the conversation with her, and she would be rational. And by the end of the conversation, she would be so upset that, I remember thinking to myself, if I was a cop listening to this, if she walked in the police station, my eyes would probably roll in the back of my head, and I would say, okay, I've got somebody here who's mentally unstable. But now that I know her and I understand what she's going through, it's basically just stark terror, that causes this kind of reaction in her. I can't blame her one bit, but it's really counterproductive when it comes to trying to convince somebody to look at it as a crime. When I was a policeman, I had the power to do search warrants and subpoenas and criminal investigations, but basically now that I'm retired and I'm a private investigator, I can't do any of that. I'm basically a citizen that can testify in court, and I got a license from the state. So I have to rely on, to a certain extent, law enforcement to take over and work these kind of, work a case like this. And to be honest with you, up to this point, I am still unsuccessful. And it is really disheartening because I think this lady is really frightened, and I think she has every reason to be frightened based upon what you found during your analysis of these tissue samples. Something happened to her. I don't know exactly what, but I think we owe it to her to try and find out what it was.
Correct, and I'm on that same boat with you. And the other aspect, too, Dr. Rima, for your side of the audience, is that this individual was an educator and brought over cultural exchange in music and a professional musician herself. And in this time, approximately 8 years ago, she crossed the path of, I'm going to call it an individual that may have wanted to interact in a good way. But in this process, that was 8 years ago, and then 2 years back, meaning from 2011, is when she was sitting at her desk, as I stated earlier, had telephone in her right ear, on her right ear, the receiver, and then got a pain in her left ear that felt like burning needles of glass. She looked and she did see movement in the bushes, but did not see anyone or anything like that. In other words, saw the bushes move. And then when we got the analysis, that's when I was able to put together that due to the design of what the Mesogen, being the man-made device to separate it from a benign tumor, it definitely had to be made, at least from the current literature searches and the technology to be used as this enamel had to be made with the use of a microwave technology, for the simple reason that the animal protein was found in the center of the material, with the outside core, the enamel compounds.
Where else are mesogens being found, being used, being discovered where we would not expect them?
Well, last summer, in June of 2010, there was heavy aerial spraying here in the Los Angeles area, and this aerial spraying moved within a week of each one of these locations to those locations. It went eastward from Los Angeles to New York City to Saudi Arabia. Within that month, I had 3 specimens taken from the nasal bulb of individuals, which used the remedy of just table salt in warm salt water on a Q-tip, rubbed the area that was burning and bothering them, and the material came out perfectly in formation. And I received those specimens, sent it to the lab, got photomicrographs, and determined that due to the cost of the analysis, we only did each one of I'm going to call it the hooks, which you can see on the images, which is like a little claw. All 3 of them matched to compounds of 18 other proteins, and in particular, they also had a 730 frequency, which was on the microraman, which was for polyurethane styrene and urethane, waterborne urethane, and they also had the little hooks or claws, which were made out of superglue. And these individuals were professionals. They don't sniff glue or anything and never been around it, so it's not normal to have materials that are made out of hooked onto your nasal passage bulb with superglue. But looking at it from either a surveillance or exposure, if I could take a nanomaterial such as these mesogens, which just makes a unit, a device of these nanomaterials into a tool, or I should say robot, the thing is, if I could sprinkle the area and then use the population as my monitoring tool, what an invention. Because it might have been, since it was isolated in the nasal bulb, a material that was used to possibly smell what you smell, versus in some of the ear canal or in other films. I've had patients or work with individuals that had thin films in their ear, which did not form as this calcification, but a film, just like if you were taking saran wrap or any of that type of film out of your ear with a cotton swab. That material ended up being high-density polyethylene and polymethacrylate.
Now, you said, what could they put into your nose to smell what you smell? What could they put into your ears to hear what you hear? That's where things get pretty science fiction-y. I need to know from both of you, and of course I do, this is a rhetorical question, that the technology exists and is being disseminated to tap into your neurological information systems as communicators and units in somebody else's communication network. I think we should talk about that.
Okay. Well, I can start with that. Basically, I mean, if you think about it, right now there's technology, it's old, very old technology, telemetry units for people that have like heart disease or other medical problems. And I remember seeing, like on television, people that wear like these packs on their belt. And basically what it would do, it would monitor their body functions. So when it came time to report in, they would take a telephone, and they actually had a modem in this little pack, and the modem would transmit the information from the pack to the doctor, to where they could the doctor could monitor your heart and monitor, whatever else it was that they were checking on. Now, I understand, since the research that I've done to try and come up to speed on this, is that it's now been miniaturized to the point where, like a pacemaker, if it's implanted underneath your skin, you could take your cell phone and you dial a number, and you're going to dial a number in to send it to your doctor. And it you send the information by the cell phone. You can also do it through your computer. You get something that's akin to a barcode reader, and it hooks to your computer, and you can do that. We have technology right now. If you think about it, when people chip their dogs, okay, I have a microchip in your dog. It's a silicon chip, and basically it goes underneath. They use a hypodermic needle. It's implanted underneath the skin of the animal, and it lies dormant there until it is hit with RF radio frequency, with the little wand that the veterinarian has. And what that does, it activates the chip, which then transmits to the device a signal, and it gives a serial number out. And the serial number is in a database, so they can find out who the dog belongs to or where it's supposed to be. So we already have this type of technology. The only thing that people are really having a problem getting their mind around is the miniaturization of it, and the fact that it can be made biological, and that it can be put in the body and replicate itself. But all the time we hear things about, like you're treating of colon cancer. There's nanotechnology that's in use now, I understand, that attacks specifically just the cancer cells. So the people, they don't go through chemotherapy where their whole body is destroyed in the hope of it killing the cancer cells before it kills the person. And it's all directed directly to the cancer cells, because it reacts to how the cancer cells are, what they're made of, and certain things inside of the cancer cells. So we already have this technology. It's just like if you take, for example, when you walk through a store and somebody tries to shoplift with a little radio frequency tag. Another example is that at certain gas stations you can get a little keychain fob, and you put it on your keychain, and instead of putting your credit card in, you just swipe that near the machine, and it reacts to it, and it reads your card, and it debits your account, and you don't even have to touch the gas pump with your credit card any longer. So we have this technology now, and like I said, what people have a problem wrapping their head around is the fact that it can be miniaturized, that it can be put into the body, and to the degree that it's advanced. And because that was the problem that I first had with it until I did about 30 or 40 hours of research.
Right, and you did that on your own. You researched it, Michael, and came up with your own professional conclusions as the integration of the different disciplines within it. And also, Dr. Rima, many of these materials, in particular the liquid crystals that are used because they have different melting points or could be combined with composite material, in particular nanocomposite material, they can be designed by using even acetylcholinesterase chloride that then can be coated onto this device or this crystal or part of that crystal, placed into the body. It will react with the red blood cell acetylcholinesterase. Yes, your level of acetylcholinesterase would go up as a high reading than normal, but at the same time, the unique thing with red blood cell cholinesterase is that it will lodge within, or high accumulations will form within the neurojunctions. So in response to your question for both of us, where you could have a material that could be part of this Mesogen device, which is part of the crystals that are going to form in the future, that would anchor in these neurojunction areas and go to specific areas of the body or into the brain. And it's so easy to just change temperature of the the spinal column in the meninges. Just 1 degree change will allow it to go in. At the same time, if it's entered into the ear canal, there is a fine hole that is in the skull that even though it's small, it could be designed to go into that area or to go and deliver through the eustachian tube. It depends on what is the intent and how smart. Beg pardon, I'm sorry?
How do we protect ourselves?
I think from my experience and also observation of these individuals is be as clean physically as possible, and at the same time, when you notice changes within your body, start using the appropriate like salt or any of these materials that help dissolve these nanocrystalline base materials. It's a complex area because it's multi-layered. It's not like just benzene exposure onto the body or any of this thing. It's like don't be dependent on the computer. Start reading a book. Use your brain to function more versus doing it. And I want to bring out too that this individual was very articulate, multiple, bilingual, and very intelligent. And it doesn't have to have intelligence, but what I'm saying is she had strong brain power, I'm going to call it that, that when you look at the pictures as compared to pictures of mesogen that came out of an eye tear duct or out of, another specimen in its more perfect stage, it was like her body was trying to reject it, trying to dissolve it, trying to get it out, versus many individuals that don't have that physical chemical composition or allow it's doing what it was originally designed to do, which I feel is to integrate within your body so that it could not be detected or not
so
be...
this is a kind of rejection. This is a kind of rejection response.
Correct. It still did its function because she had a history of symptoms that she could feel her brain, as she called it, God bless, getting fried, affecting, that's the left side of her brain. Also, which was unique on MRI analysis, which I didn't address in the paper, but it was also shown that she had, which would go up the spine, bilateral cysts, which is very unusual because you might have a cyst or a couple cysts, but they're not bilaterally. But when you're dealing with nanotechnology, or in particular mesogens, it's designed to go symmetrically bilaterally up the spinal cord because it would integrate into the nervous system, those neurotrees and neurojunctions, so that it could monitor or do a function of that body.
Dr. Staninger, one of the things that I found particularly interesting and what really kind of, at the beginning of this, swayed me to be a lot more receptive to this was our discussion that we had about the body's ability to generate electricity. And if you recall, I asked you if somebody were to implant an LED light inside of in your forehead and use nanotechnology to gather electricity that the body naturally produces to make muscles function, I said, could you light that light? And you said, absolutely.
Yes.
Could you maybe expound a little bit more on that? Because that was one of the things to me. I'm saying, how does all this work? Well, everybody knows about electricity, and I know that our body works on electricity. In the police work, the tasers were used. They disrupt the muscles, the electricity, and also the muscles don't function. So that to me was something.
And this is like the reverse, using it for the integration into the system, because it's really the materials that are used, example like nanowires, are used to gather the energy so that it could create, as we learned, I learned when I had Dr. Zhong Wang on, who invented nanotubes and different wires. He stated that from just moving your say the nanomaterial, in particular the nano use of piezoelectrical devices or mineral, formations, that if you just moved your finger just up and then down, that could create as much as 11 watts within the biological system. And many individuals that I've evaluated from exposure to advanced nanomaterials did have an accumulation of electrical energy or feeling shocks or energy dispersing, just like when you have static electricity, it comes out of your body and you feel the shock. This would be feeling it more internally because the materials, the piezoelectrical device or nanomaterials, may have accumulated in certain neurojunctions or certain areas of the body. And another feature, too, in many of these, what I termed mesogens, when it has a side chain, which is of a siloxane. A siloxane, yes, is made out of the silica and the silicones, but it also has a unique feature like silane. It has a head of an ammonium ion and also usually a two-part polyester. The thing is that the ammonium ion, because it's NH4, will always have a charge, and what it normally does is go and electrocute bacteria or other things. But if you have a high amount of these materials, I could see easily how it could integrate into the nervous system or absorb into the pores of that tissue to integrate and cause, I'm going to call it, various electrical fields within the body versus your body being a bioelectrical source. Do you have any other questions for us, Dr. Rima?
I do. I have lots and lots and lots of questions.
Well, this is good.
By the way, I want to let people know, as I know you have in the material that you sent out, that we'll be talking about these issues and others at the Natural Solutions Foundation's 3rd Annual War Council. We're being assaulted, all of us, collectively, by technology and by public policy that is designed, quite frankly, to kill about 90% of us. That's a genocidal agenda, absolutely clearly articulated by the international organizations that are pushing it, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the United States government talk about sustainability. They talk about Agenda 21. What these are code words for, tell you what, we've decided that you're going to die. 90% of the population of the earth is superfluous. We are referred to, you and I, our children, our loved ones, as useless eaters. And since there is a war against us, the people, and one of the techniques of this war is the technology that we are talking about here today, since that's going on, we've decided not to just lie down and be happy with that. So we, the Natural Solutions Foundation, annually hold a war council which people can attend live in Newton, New Jersey, electronically via webinar, or they can attend via internet radio. And if you'd like to know how to do that, the War Council, by the way, will be held on January 8th, this coming Sunday, from 10 in the morning till 5 p.m., and Dr. Hilde will be one of our brilliant and valued speakers. If you'd like to attend that War Council, you can do so by just simply doing a search for 3rd Annual War Council or just Natural Solutions Foundation War Council. You need to be there. You need to bring your friends and your colleagues. And how about some of the people who don't believe you when you say the things that you're hearing now? And how about giving them the hard-hitting reality of what's going on and then helping them integrate it and become activated to push back this monstrous genocidal plan? This is of enormous importance to us all. And if you think, well, they won't kill me, think again. They are valuable to themselves.
And a lot of the literature I wanted to add, Dr. Rima, is that I remember in the first War Council, you had me be a speaker, and I was very honored to be the speaker with Dr. Coldison on his paper. But the thing is, you asked me, I did a paper on smart dust and smart crystal notes, and you said, hey, audience, do you hear her? They can chip you, you know, and look, approximately less than 3 years later, we're talking about a brain chip now in slang, okay? At the same time, in any of this, the literature keeps pointing, or any of these laws, to the post-human. What is the post-human? We've had other guests on the shows, and it's not only the integration of controlling you, but it's what is left, I think, of humanity. And it's time, not many, for all of us. Doesn't matter what your beliefs are, et cetera. We're all human. We're all created in the image of God. And at the same time, it's time for us to realize that if you don't connect to your higher self of yourself and change your energy field, you could definitely be a target in this. And that might be an answer to what you said beyond salt, and asking the question is maintaining a higher vibration than all of this, as well as you can within your own belief system. Before we end the show, I would like to ask, are any materials or topics of my guest that we did not cover on this portion of the show, would you like to bring out? Michael, do you have anything else to add to the show? Or to the comments to the audience?
Well, just that if you have a problem with something like this, I think it's extremely important to first verify that there's a problem. In other words, get the testing done if you can afford it, because once you know that there's a problem, it's much easier from my perspective to get someone to look into it. Whether or not you can prove if a crime was committed or find out what happened, that's another thing. But I can guarantee that if you go to someone, especially in the law enforcement community, and say, I've been attacked with nanotechnology, and you don't have anything to back it up, you're not going to get anywhere. They're going to politely tell you that they can't help you, or in a worst-case scenario, they're going to take you for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. I
absolutely agree with you on that, but let's say that you have excellent evidence and you can show that something has wound up in your body that doesn't belong there. There's no question about it. Now, is there, in fact, any realistic way that a person can likely show that a crime has been committed or hold someone accountable or receive redress?
Yeah, and that's the responsibility of law enforcement. I mean, I'd look at it as if I got this phone call and I was still working as a full-time peace officer in California, I would, especially if they have somebody in mind, I would do a background investigation on that person. I would attempt to find out what happened, who they are, and if there's anything to look at. And that's we talked earlier about the police having the power of subpoena and search warrants and things like that. But you have to find somebody that's willing to actually take the time and investigate a case that may go nowhere. And a lot of times with law enforcement being as stressed as they are with all the things that they're doing, real-time things that they know a crime's been committed, sometimes it's hard to find that person that's willing to do that. But I'm pretty sure that eventually somebody's going to have enough information to where there's going to be a successful prosecution criminally for a case like this, because as far as I can tell, this is a poisoning at least.
I want you to tell us, if you will, both of you, whom you think is responsible for these events.
Well, as far as the case that we're talking about right now, the client has an individual that they believe was involved. I really don't, since it's still pending, I think it would be inappropriate to give any information out about it. But, you have to understand, too, that I went to one law enforcement agency about this, and the response I got from the detective I spoke to was that, well, how do you know she just didn't eat paint chips when she lived in China? And that's the kind of things that we're trying to overcome. Because, and unfortunately, it's like now, I think all the groundwater in the country has some sort of antibiotic in it because people flush their old medication down the toilet. You know, I mean, there could be a legitimate reason why some of this stuff is here, but not all of it.
Right. And it's weird, too. It might be that once you have these things, you qualify for a new experiment or the profile of one. I hear the music in our background. I want to thank my guest, Dr. Rima Lebeau, and also Michael DiMatteo for being my special guest on this hour. Thank you both, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Yes. Same here. Thank you.
Informed, enlightened, alive and amplified. This is the Living Light Network.
Different chemicals, different families of, different elements that then go and combine to make different compounds and different substances. In this, though, each one of the different families of the periodic table based on their elements have a special category. Example, the halogens, which are iodine, boron, fluoride, and iodine, where you also have transitional metals being barium, aluminum, zinc, etc., that have another trait. But what is different with the mesogen? And in particular, mesogens were used in nano delivery systems for medicines or technology so that they react under certain conditions. By reaction is if you took your hand and you made a fist, that right now I'm going to call the liquid crystal. It is compressed. A liquid crystal has a unique feature. It can melt at one point and not totally dissolve and change its characteristic into smaller crystalline lattices, or I should say crystal lattice, crystalline forms. The thing is that in many of this technology, it's coated with another chemical. So if you have the fist that is made that we call the liquid crystal, as it is formed, it can be coated in different compounds. These compounds will react under certain conditions. These certain conditions, and this, what I'm saying to you audience too, can be that this crystal contains in it the components, which can be little spheres or little dots that are seen on many pictures that can form into silicone arrays, which then make nanotubes, nanobelts, nano wires, etc. Okay, it is a complex field. I do recommend highly Nanotechnology for Dummies and other related books, and also books that are in a beautiful catalog by CRC Press, which will be having many of their authors on the show in the future. But you can see that it is multiple aspects done with this, but in particular, always remember a mesogen is a collection of liquid crystals with the special feature, and that's where it's based on its design and ability to twist or make different shapes. The thing is that it is dependent upon amount of oxygen, the halogens that are present, meaning like chlorine, fluorine, bromine, etc. It is also dependent on temperature and frequency. There may be some other variables as new devices are being made, but these are the primary devices. If you have your fist and you made your liquid crystal here and it's coated, if you were to take it, as we took one of our specimens and we melted it, normally a melting would occur at a certain temperature. Example, like enamel from your teeth will melt by melt meaning totally dissolve and usually burn up and disappear, it will melt at 1,268 degrees centigrade. But some of these other compounds melt at different temperatures or react. In the paper I'm presenting next weekend, we found that a material that it didn't even melt. It changed complete form, got black, and made a green powder after getting to a temperature starting with 0 and ending up with 1,100 degrees Celsius. That means multiply it by 2, add 35 for a quick analogy of what the Fahrenheit temperature is. The thing is, welcome, audience, to the One Cell, One Light radio with your host, Dr. Hildegarde Staninger, commonly known as Dr. Hildy. This is our first show for the year 2012, and in this year, which on February 4th of this year will be under Chinese astrological signs, will be the year of the water dragon. And during this time, many truths are to be unveiled and shown to be, as colleagues of mine used to say, proof in the pudding. Today's show is not a unique show, but a very truthful. It is stating facts on 2 parts. The first part is going to be on what are Mesogens and their technology of building nano brain chips. At the same time, on the second hour, I'm going to have guests of Dr. Rima Lebeau from the Natural Solutions Foundation, and also Mr. Michael DiMatteo of California Investigators, who Michael and I were involved in a case of an individual that ended up being a brain chip, and we're going to share that information with the world. And at the same time, there is a special conference that's occurring on this January 8th, which is in reference to the War Council that is going to be hosted by Dr. Rima Lebeau, and I've been asked to be a special guest speaker on that to present the global brain chip and Mesogens, nanomachines for ultimate control of false memories. This subject is one not hard to present, but very scientific, very engineering, very political, very everything, audience. It is very hard. Everyone thinks, like you could have an RDIF chip, or you could have a tag of DNA, or a clone specimen. By clone specimen, I mean of certain tissues within the body. But with the advent of nanotechnology, as I've had my guest on in previous shows in 2011, all of us recognize, not only as engineers, scientists, attorneys, professors, or anything, if the intent is for ill will, it can be done for ill will. If it is for good, it will be done for good. This particular materials can be used just as well to make new bone, new tissue, and give a person a new kneecap and the benefit of walking, or a new spinal cord. But at the same time, it can be used for very mean intents, which is primarily what I'm going to discuss, is its role in brain chips and also the use of the technology. In the beginning of books that were written within these last 5 years or so, there's been quite a lot of information given in reference to, as I had on my guest speaker, Tom Horn, in reference to transhumanism. And basically, transhumanism is when you are no longer totally human, like 100% human. You also have some kind of material in you, or other foreign DNA, or other, I'm going to say foreign cells, because so many things can be cloned and chipped now. That it doesn't make you 100% human. You might be 99 or 98 or maybe even 95, but as you lose that quality, you take on other traits. That's what the literature is starting to point out and show. I want to give you a quote, though, that I quoted in a paper that I wrote for this weekend, which is by William E. Halal. He's this is from Emerging Technologies and the Global Crisis of Maturity, and he stated, although technological powers will be vast and progress will likely be made, the normal level of social resistance and political statement is likely to oppose change. Thus, it may take an occasional environmental collapse, global wars, and terrorists, or get unknown calamities to force the move to global consciousness. And in this, when you can introduce what I'm going to discuss specifically, what is a mesogen and how is it made, etc., keep that quote in mind. It can be of a total unknown origin, meaning scientists or the ones who made it will know what it is. But when you see in a paper that we're going to attach to our site after the show and after it's presented this weekend, you'll see that it is not just one aspect. It's not a metal, it's not just a crystal, it's not just a mineral, it's not just chemicals that are composed. It's all of it in one small, minute element, which we call nanotechnology. And in that element of nanotechnology, audience, there are so many building blocks. I can go into nanowires, nanotubes, nanomicroarrays, nano belts, nanofibers, nano nylon, nano microspheres, etc. And the new term is being microspheres, micro powders, micro this, because nano right now has like a little tinge on it. But there is also an inventor and an author, which many of us have quoted over the time, and I've read his books, and that, which is Ray Kurzweil. He is an inventor for NASA, an author, and he wrote a book called Singularity is Near. Singularity is to be when we, as a human race, and all of the world, is connected to an implantable information chip that could be developed or wired directly into the brain. There's many projects out there that are funded by many individual parties or governmental or any entity in the name of science and engineering to have research in this area. But I'm going to share with you, audience, especially on the second half of the show, the results of a removal of a brain tumor, which was known as a meningioma because it was not cancerous. But when our company, Integrative Health Systems, was retained to do advanced nanomaterials analysis on it, we found a whole different story. And that story was showing how this material in reality was a mesogen. And a mesogen may be coated with many different thin films or other types of technology in the nanotechnology realm and also the biosensory realm. And why I call biosensors? Because this technology is not just developed to control if we look at it as just being some bad people out there trying to control the whole world or anything like that, it is also used for individuals that may have a broken spinal cord or a column and used to connect those neurons so that it can also send the transmission. In the aspect of sending signals. But we have to also remember that many of the new inventions that have been done in nanotechnologies, which is not stated in my paper, example like the nano radio that was invented, it was created by a certain company and used for its use in nanomedicine so that it can send a signal, you can hear different conversations, etc. This type of technology can easily be placed in certain aspects of the ear canal or behind the ear, which is an old technology, voice-to-skull technology, where you had an electrode or a sensor there. But now with nanotechnology, it's made and designed by these skilled scientists and creators of this world to integrate into biological forms of our body. And in doing this, it is designed so that the body will hopefully not reject it so it can integrate into it. But in cases where you've got, I'm going to say, pure cells and pure identity of what it is, it does see this technology as a foreign invader, the foreign invader being the chemicals it's made of. I'm going to go specifically into different types of mesogens and how it can be used in the interface of a brain chip and other things, so it addresses our guest on the second half of the show. But I want you to keep in mind as we go through this discussion, and I'm basically talking to you by myself, audience. I have some technical support that will help me if I stumble or get a brain freeze in my discussion. The thing
yes,
is,
you do.
Which is Michael Edward. The thing is that you have to remember that we were created in a divine being, and no matter what your beliefs are, we basically are the same. We may have good heart, bad heart, whatever it may be, but we are human. And when you play around with this type of stuff in artificial biology, you end up creating many different other entities or abilities for different energies to come in. And that's not going to be the topic of this show, the different energy fields. The specific thing that I want you to get out of this first hour is, what is a mesogen and how is it used in not only medicine or in this type of technology for brain-computer interface? And when I say brain-computer interface, audience, I also mean that its ability to be connected to various other wireless technologies, say your cell phone, your computer, your TV, because remember our TVs were switched to high-definition TV all over the United States. So with different technologies, you may have a crystal that will resonate, and the liquid crystal that will resonate at a certain frequency so that it can interact with different equipment. Now, what is most important about any of this technology of the mesogens is that I came from OSHA and a lot of industry and academia that we were trained, and I wrote a beautiful book, The Comprehensive Handbook of Hazardous Materials, years ago. It became the international bestseller still to this day, and referenced in 94 reference libraries throughout the world, and also part of the amended OSHA standard for hazard communication as a reference document there for what is a hazardous material. A hazardous material is anything that can cause neurological, immune, liver, teratogen, cancer, any other special categories, ill health to an occupational worker. The thing is, though, in the field, many industrial hygienists or environmentalists or other related disciplines as safety engineers and occupational nurses and physicians do recognize that different chemical families can cause different types of toxicity within the body and thus prime you for disease or interaction. Also, it is also important that certain chemical compositions or specific chemical blends are known to go to certain organ systems. Why I say that is because when you start to really get into what is a liquid crystal and its types, what is a mesogen, and knowing these advanced nano building blocks that are used to make a machine or device that is used to integrate into another system or a smart system, you will find that whether it was the luck of the professor who invented it or the commercialization of the product into the nano world, I find it very interesting that certain chemicals that were used to make certain certain technologies of the mesogens or the types of them use specific chemicals that are very toxic to the body, react in specific ways, but have an affinity for certain areas of the body. I'll give you a prime example. We have gasoline. Gasoline is made up of 3 compounds, benzene, toluene, and xylene. In particular, benzene, which we know causes leukemia, but usually within 24 hours of exposure or when you're exposed to it, it converts in the body through the liver into phenol. So is phenol causing the leukemia, or is benzene the parent chemical, phenol being the metabolite? So I want you to keep those items in mind, audience, as we go over what is a mesogen. It is important to note that mesogens are made from a term or a group of compounds that are known as liquid crystals. Liquid crystals are, as we know, we have a prime example. When you look at water, you have it in 3 different forms. You have it in a liquid form, as we know we get our water from our tap water. We have it in as a gas when it's created into steam, as we boil our water to make tea. And then we also have it as ice, which is its crystalline lattice format. And that's what we're going to discuss, the use of liquid crystals that have specific properties that are then used and incorporated with other compounds to create the term mesogen. And there's different types of mesogens that we're going to learn about. Now, this is a complex topic just to discuss. So when we do show the Vimeo of this show, you will see a number of pictures. And I know as you listen and you also look at the pictures, you'll be able to see a lot of things that I'm talking about. The importance of the pictures, in particular with anything, and I used to teach, as I call it, school many, many years ago, the importance is that with a picture, it says 1,000 words. You can easily see what I'm talking about. So please, audience, bear with me, and you will understand, especially when you get to review it again with the Vimeo and see the photomicrographs that we have and many of the examples of how it is formed and made, these technologies. Now, in particular with the mesogens, it is important to note that many of you may forget what you had in chemistry. You have to remember that each aspect of the periodic chart has